Shalom, shalom, familiar man. Yahawah's Daggers. Back at it again. Another week, another lesson. All right. First off, I want to say and give all honor, all glory, all praises due to the Most High God, Yahawah. And we do so in the name of who the world ignorantly refers to as Jesus Christ, Hamashiach Yahweh Shai. Right. Now, the title of this video is Are Traditions of Man Evil? Right. And we all know what time of the year it is. Right. We know Thanksgiving was just the other day, right? Which, we ain't doing none of that, right? Thanksgiving's coming up, Christmas is coming up, thing like Kwanzaa and all these other traditions, they're all coming up, right? But right now, in this lesson, we're primarily going to focus on the tradition of Christmas, or as Christ Mass, as certain Catholic sects will refer to it as, right? Um, and all this sparked, you know, I'm part of this Facebook group, Hebrew Israelite and Christian Bible discussion, and I saw this one guy comment saying traditions of men aren't evil, and he said that Christ kept traditions of men, and then he quotes where Christ kept feasts like Purim and Hanukkah, right? Which aren't necessarily, those feasts aren't ordained in the law, right? In the Torah, right? Those feasts came way after the law and the Torah, but once they were established, even Christ himself were keeping it. And so this Christian made that point to say that if Purim and Hanukkah are good traditions to keep, then he's saying so is Christmas, right? And that's the point that a lot of Christians, especially in this chat, are taking. That even if it has nothing to do with the actual birth of Christ, because they'll even say that no one really, really knows. It's just a day that was just chosen to celebrate the day of his birth, right? Um, they'll take that point. It's just a tradition that we just decided to start keeping, right? And they'll go into different ancient Roman pagan festivals and with documentation to try to disprove the connection between Christmas and festivals like Saturnalia. I think another one is like Sol Invictus, like the birth of the sun god or something like that to the Romans. And they'll try to separate it, right? And say it's its own organic tradition that has nothing to do with paganism, right? Either way you look at it, we about to dive into these traditions, right? Are traditions of men evil? Is the tradition of Christmas evil, right? And so let me share my screen and get the first precept. Hey, yo, Ak, you wanna read these precepts when they come on the screen?
Con.
Word, word. All right, so we're gonna first get to the book of Mark, chapter 7, and we're gonna read 7 through 13.
All right. Mark chapter 7, verse 7. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, ye hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cups, and many other such things ye do. And he said unto them, full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own traditions. For Moses said, honor thy father and thy mother, and whoso curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, if a man shall say to his father or mother, it is Corban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. Up to verse 11, correct?
Uh, 13, Salakia.
My bad. Salaki. And ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition which ye have delivered. And many such like things do ye.
Khan. So obviously we see here a conversation between Christ and one of the Pharisees, right? And obviously the Pharisees are well known for being hypocrites, right? Saying one thing and doing something else, right? And you see, we hear Christ here having a conversation with them, saying that you lay aside the commandments of God for your traditions. And then he mentions washing pots and cups, right? Now, right? I'm not gonna say washing cups and pots are evil, right? Nobody does. My lady just finished me washing dishes after dinner. You know what I mean? My wife's not a sin for washing dishes, right? The problem is they were laying hold even simple things like washing cups and washing hands, right? There's another instance where Christ and his disciples are about to eat, but the elders want them to wash their hands, right? And Christ gets into the same conversation again, essentially like, why do you lay aside the traditions of, the commandments of God through your traditions, right? So even something as simple as doing dishes, these Pharisees were holding over the commandments of God and giving more weight to them and teaching that these things have more weight, right, than the traditions of than the commandments of the Most High God. And that's why at the end, verse 13, where it says, making the word of God of none effect through your traditions. So it's not necessarily the tradition in of itself, right? But when you're laying aside what we're supposed to be doing, what we were commanded by the Most High God Himself, right? The creator, right, of everything, right? And Christians view the Most High in the same manner, right? The Father, the Creator, everything. He gave us laws, commandments, and instructions to do. He ordained us what to do and how to follow, and He gave us the guidelines. If we start coming up with our own new traditions and then putting those over what we were commanded to by the Most High God, that is where the fault is, and that's where the issue lies, right? And it's not just the tradition in of itself, right? It's the weight you give to tradition, how much honor and reverence you give to it. That makes it evil. But then there's also another thing that will make the tradition evil, which is why you start the tradition and what manners and facets you keep the tradition, right? Damn, why did I stop sharing my screen? I could have just picked another tab. Oh no, I did it right. Why is my other screen not popping up? I was just typing in that same screen I already had opened up. There we go. There we go. I found it. All right, bet. All right. The next verse, we can get Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20, right? And this is what we hold our standards to. If you want to read that.
Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20. To the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them.
Come on. And that can be applied to many different facets, right? Whether if it's these certain doctrines that Christianity likes to teach, specifically around Paul and his epistles, right? And if what they teach and understand doesn't line up with the law, the prophets, and the testimonies, it's false. Same thing can be said for traditions, right? There's nothing wrong with having traditions or creating traditions, but it's the weight you put upon those traditions, why you do those traditions, and what manner and facets you do those traditions, right? Because if, let's say, me and my lady, we want to have a new tradition where every year on, 3 weeks after the Passover, right, we have a tradition where we go to the beach for the day, and that's just something we do repetitively, right? And it's like a tradition for us. But if we start teaching and saying, "Hey, you have to do this. Don't worry about Passover, or don't worry about these other laws. Do go to the beach on this specific day because that's what we set up to do." Now you off. That's where you start to. That's if I started to do that. I'm tripping, right? But if I create, let's say not, but let's say I create another tradition, and I like the way these, let's say I like the way these East Indians have with their festivals and all the different colors and facets. Let me do that. Let me copy their festival, but I'm gonna say I'm doing it for Christ. I'm gonna say I'm doing it for God. I just like the way they're doing their little, how they rain different like paint and colors from the sky, whatever festival it is, right? Let me do that, but I'm gonna say I'm doing it for Christ. That's where you start having issues because if you start taking practices that go against the testimony in the Bible, in the scriptures, that go against the word and go against the law, now you're starting to err. Now you start to have issues coming up. And through the spirit of Most High God, what you're gonna see of Christmas is one of these wicked traditions, or if it's a harmless tradition. Because we see traditions in themselves aren't bad, because things like Purim and Hanukkah, right? Even Christ kept those traditions, right? He kept those feast days, which those feast days aren't found or ordained in the law, but Christ kept them, because Purim and Hanukkah didn't go against what's instructed in the law. Didn't go against the testimonies of the prophets and other people throughout the scriptures. So if it lines up with that measuring stick, right, in Isaiah 8 and 20, then nothing can be said against it, right? But if it doesn't line up with Isaiah 8 and 20, and if it doesn't line up with what Christ said in Mark 7, you're going off, right? And so without further ado, these are our two measuring sticks. Are we upholding the traditions over the commandments of God? And do these traditions go against the law and the testimony? And so without further ado, I'm going to get this next tab and just go into the history. These next couple tabs I'm going to is history about Christmas, right? And I'll read these documents and letters that I'm pulling up.
Okay, bet. I was gonna ask you if you wanted me to read.
Because there's specific points I have in these. I'm not gonna read we're not gonna read this whole thing right here, right? But so essentially this website, right, is right an Episcopal dictionary of the church, right? .org, right? Episcopalchurch.org, right? So a Christian website, so to speak, right? Christmas or Christ Mass, right? Christmas is Old English for Christus Massis, or however you say that. It's a festival celebrated on December 25th, commemorating the incarnation of the Word of God and the birth of Jesus Christ, also known as the Nativity of our Lord Jesus Christ, right? According to the Philocalian calendar, which I'm probably butchering this word, Philocalian calendar, right? A Roman calendar. Christmas was first celebrated in Rome in the year 336. It gradually spread to the churches of the East, which already had a festival on January 6th, commemorating the manifestation of God in both the birth and baptism of Jesus. The date December 25th rests on no historical foundation. It was probably chosen to oppose the feast of Natalis Solis Invicti, or the birthday of the unconquerable sun god, which took place at the winter solstice to celebrate the birth of the Son of Righteousness, right? So essentially, with these group of Christians, who run this website, their take on the concept of Christmas, right, from the evidence laid out in history, is that there's no solid date on the day of Christ's birth, which is going to be a running theme with all these documents, right? No, there's no solid. That's it. They chose, right? Christians over time, majority of the Christian world chose to celebrate it on December 25th, but there's no actual proof that Christ was born on December 25th. None, right? And then so some of the theories which they propose here is that, or maybe it was chose to as an opposition to paganism, because a running theme to a lot of people who don't celebrate these Christian holidays, whether they're from the Hebrew Israelite community or whether they're from any other school of thought, to oppose Christmas and Christian holidays, is the fact that, they'll say these Christian holidays evolved from Roman paganism, right? Which a lot of Christianity has, especially if Christmas was first celebrated in 336 BC. That's sketchy, because in the same time frame, in 322, right around the 320 BC circa, right, was the Council of Nicaea, and there were other councils around that same time that had the same ways. The Council of Nicaea, basically going over the new structure of what would be known as Christianity, right? Especially after when Emperor Constantine converted the Roman country to Christianity, and mixing a lot of Roman paganism within the new religion to make conversion easier. That's at least what Constantine did, right? But then we have similar things like in the Council of Nicaea, where they're debating the understanding of the scriptures and how to go about it. And that's where like the different Trinitarian school of thoughts come from. where they have Arianism, Trinitarianism, and monolatrianism, and all these different things, right? That take root throughout Christianity from that point on out, right? But there are early mentions to Christmas before 336, but that's the first recording of the actual feast, right? Um, According to this Roman calendar, right? So when I saw this, I'm like, let me see what this is about, right? So we're gonna get what that Roman document is. If it says that's when Christmas was first held. Let's see. Yep. All right, so this is Britannica.com, right? Britannica.com on the topic of Christmas. The word Christmas is derived from the Old English Christes Masses, right? Christ Mass. There is no certain tradition of the date of Christ's birth, like it said in the other from the Christian website. Christian chronographers of the 3rd century believed that the creation of the world took place at the spring equinox, then reckoned as March 25th. Hence, the new creation in the incarnation, i.e., the conception and death of Christ, must therefore have occurred on the same day, with his birth following 9 months later at the winter solstice, December 25th. This is the oldest extant notice of a feast of Christ's nativity occurs in a Roman almanac, right? So essentially now is getting into more specifically, okay, well, if there's no historical date or proof given on December 25th, why December 25th? And so um what these Christians are doing throughout the centuries is basically, which is none of this is historically found, none of this is scripturally found, there's no evidence to this, but they'll try to say, okay, this is the day Christ died. He must have been born 9 months earlier. When what does his day of death have anything to do with the day of his birth? Right? It's a reach and a stretch and a song, but that's the school of thought of the date of Christ's birth, right? Not necessarily the celebration of his birth. I mean, the celebration of it, but the debate of just when he was born, right? Because historically, before Christmas was ever held, there were debates for at least 200 to 300 years after the death of Christ of when he was even born. But the school of thought is, okay, the world began in March, right? That's what they believe, right? The world began in spring, right? The beginning of the year when life springs. Ironically, it's the spring is the Hebraic New Year as well, right? Probably where they get that school of thought from. But they'll say, okay, creation, everything came into existence in spring. So that means the word of God must have came in spring. And he also died in spring. So then he must have been born not much earlier. There's nothing to support that whole school of thought. But yet the celebration of when to celebrate it is based on this whole school of thought that doesn't even have any solid foundation. So already it's wonky, right? Let's get the next tab. So Sol Invictus and Christmas. Because a lot of people say, right before I get this next tab, a lot of people say Christmas goes back to the Roman festival Saturnalia, or they'll say it goes back to the Roman festival Sol Invictus, which that was new to me. Sol Invictus, I've never even heard of that. But apparently it's the birth of the Roman sun god, right? So they'll say and make these claims, oh, Christmas goes back to Saturnalia, or Christmas goes back to the birth of the Sol Invictus, right? And they'll stake it on that, right? And so, and then they'll also say why they pick December 25th. They'll say it has nothing to do with paganism. It's just, oh, that's just when he was born because he died 9 months prior, right? That's a school of thought. So this is an article from the University of Chicago. And this article, not article, this paper, so to speak, which there's a lot in this right here. I'm going to get key points, but this whole thing is extremely historically sound. This whole paper, and I'll scroll to the bottom and I'll show you why. Because a lot of things, especially with Christians nowadays, they want to ask for proof and sources, and they want to say, "I want sources from that era," right? So this whole paragraph right here is the references in this whole article, right? All of this. right?
What's
Books.
the name of the article?
The name of the article is Sol Leviticus and Christmas. Um, yeah,
Okay,
right here.
and that's with the University of Chicago.
Yep, University of Chicago, right? Universityofchicago.edu, and then it's like their encyclopedia section. Uh, but yeah, this article is titled "Sol Leviticus and Christmas," and it goes into Saturnalia, it goes into Sol Leviticus, and it goes into Christmas. And this article gets its references from dozens of books from the 1800s all the way up to the 2010s and beyond. But in those books that this article gets its information from are references to historical documents, like this document right here, which I am not going to pronounce because it's all in Latin and I don't speak Latin. But this document, they got references from Josephus, which Josephus was a first century Jewish historian. Another document, Historia Augusta, Volume 3, I'm assuming, or then another uh, excerpt from that book. And then they got different codexes and documents from the Romans, right? So these are documents from Roman sources and from Christian sources throughout the first, second, third, and fourth century, right? So this would be the proof or the evidence to go to from written by these people in that time period, right? So um the first part I'm gonna start. These other couple paragraphs, like they start way, way back, right? A lot of this isn't really necessary to the topic at hand, but it's a lot of interesting information, right? Um, but the main points I want to get right. So let's see. Where was I going to start? Okay, all right. So just to get context, right? Um, so essentially, it's there's a lot of Roman mythology being that's giving you like a understanding that prelude into what this Sol Invictus and Christmas debate comes from, right? But I'm gonna just start right here, right? So it says games were instituted, right? Roman Colosseum festivals and games as well, which are recorded in the chronography of AD 354, an illustrated codex, the first in Western art, compiled that year in Rome as a gift to a Christian aristocrat in the section known as the Calendar of Philocalius, which is what we were reading earlier in the Christian website. Essentially, this calendar is a document of Roman festivals, holidays, feast days, and events, right? And this document was gifted to this Christian aristocrat. And this document mentions Christmas, right? And so this is a document from 354 AD given to this Christian aristocrat. And in the document, there is a mention of Christmas. I'm going to keep reading. After the calligrapher, whose name appears on the dedication page, right? And this is the source uh, of that document. December 25th is annotated, right? Here's where that is in that document specifically cited. Although the dedication is uncertain, and as there is no name attached to the epithet, the presumption is that Natalis Invicti refers to the birthday of the invincible sun, who is mentioned in the games of August 28, and the foundation date of his temple, right? So essentially, now it's going into the birthday of the invincible sun, right? One of the sun gods to the Romans, right? And they were giving praise and mention of him on August 28th, and they dedicated a temple to him, right? Um, in another section of the iconography, commemorating the laying rest of martyrs, right? Disposition of martyrs, the earliest record of the Roman sanctorial. The and damn these words. The liturgical year begins on December 25th. Is annotated Natus Christus in Bethlehem. Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judah. That's what it says in Latin. In a section listing the councils, there is also a note from AD 1. Dominus Isus Christus These are the first references to December 25th as the birthday of Jesus. Since no martyrs are mentioned after 336 AD, the first celebration of Christmas observed by the Roman Church in the West is presumed to be damn. The first celebration of Christmas observed by the Roman Church in the West is presumed to date to that year, right? So, since the first mention of Christmas of being celebrated is 336 AD, it is presumed that that's the first time it was celebrated, since that's the first time it was documented and mentioned, right? And then the references to them being documented and mentioned are from um this document that was given to this Christian aristocrat, right? Which did I even look up what that is? Uh, I'm gonna share my screen real quick just so I can show what it says about what that document is, other than just saying it. And then I'm gonna go back to that paper from Chicago. All right. So this is the calendar that the information we was just reading from that document in Chicago, from the University of Chicago. And essentially, what this is, right? It's a chronograph or chronography calendar of the year of 354 AD, right? Is a compilation of chronological and calendar, calendar texts produced in 354 AD for a wealthy Roman Christian, right? So it's just a calendar, right? Just so you're not taking, just so you don't have to take my word for it, but it's a calendar of festivals within the Roman Empire. Christmas was listed in that document, right? But there's some scary things about this. So first we see this is after the Council of Nicaea, after Constantine converts the country as a whole to Christianity, right? And then we see Christmas being first mentioned and documented as a celebration. That's iffy, right? It's very sketchy. But so far, right, basically what this document is showing that there might not necessarily be a connection between the Roman festival of the sun god, right? And then it gives dates and mentions to Saturnalia was on different days of in December. The Solar Visticus celebrations were on different days in December, and how those days would change throughout the years as the different, Julian calendar, Roman calendar, Gregorian calendars are coming into effect, right? And the days and times are changing. But see, in the Julian calendar, December 25th marked the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year after which the days begin to lengthen, right? Um, that's just in the Julian calendar. But here's the main point I'm getting that I want to hark on. In 45 BC, it was decreed that public sacrifices should be made to celebrate the birthday of Julius Caesar, a sacrifice that became obligatory after he later was declared a god. The birthday of Augustus, too, was recognized in Thanksgiving after his victory at Actium, as were the birthdays of Julia Claudians. The dies natalis of the family and friends were celebrated as well, with gifts and banquets. Horace remembered the birthday of his friend and patron Massacinus. And then all these in parentheses are references to the documents. As was the birthday of Messala by Tibius, right? Marcinius by Perseus, Cynthia by her lover. Damn, these Roman names are confusing, but Perpoptrius or whatever how you pronounce that. But you get the running theme. Celebrating birthdays was a massive Roman um, concept, right? Romans were big on celebrating birthdays, right? And they'll celebrate birthdays their friends, families. They'll celebrate, but not just their friends and families, right? But they'll celebrate the birthday of key figures in their people, like Julius Caesar, right? So even if you're not the family of Julius Caesar, celebrating his birthday was not an uncommon thing, and especially so after he was declared a god, right? So we see that birthdays for your friends, family, and key figures in your people was a celebration or a concept that Romans perpetuated heavy. And then let's see what this says right here in the next paragraph. Unlike the Romans, however, Jews and Christians tended to not recognize birthdays. Late in the first century AD, Josephus remarks that the law does not permit us to make festivals at the births of our children and thereby afford occasion of drinking to excess. And then this is the document for that, right? From one of the sources in Josephus. Indeed, only two birthdays are mentioned in the New Testament. That of Pharaoh, which Genesis is the Old Testament, but that of Pharaoh, right? Genesis 40 and 20. And Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee, whose marriage to his brother's wife Herodias had been denounced by John. When her daughter Salome danced before the king at his birthday feast, she was promised whatever she might ask, which at the instigation of her mother was the head of John the Baptist. So we see birthday feasts. The day of, not the celebration of the birthday feast was mentioned for Pharaoh, but look, we see during Roman occupation of Israel, we see Romans celebrating birthday feasts. And then on that feast, she got whatever she wished for, right? And it ended up being the head of one of our ancestors, right? Which is madness. So we see that in early Christian history, right? Even before, right? We had the custom of our ancestors, that is the 12 tribes and then the Jews, as they like to separate, right? So at this time in history, Jews and Christians, they didn't even celebrate birthdays. They didn't recognize them at all whatsoever, right? Well, the Romans were big on that, right? That the gods themselves had birthdays was thought ridiculous as well, writing about 296 AD. Arnobius mocks pagans for anthropomorphizing them. We men gather our vintages, as they think and believe that the gods gather and bring in their grapes. We have birthdays, and they affirm that the powers of heavens have birthdays, right? And that's where that excerpt was from. Rather, it was the anniversary of one's death that should be remembered. Indeed, the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. And that's from Ecclesiastes 7 and 1. Mark and Paul make no reference to when Jesus was born. Matthew and Luke, although they include an account of Jesus' birth, do not mention the time of year. Nor were our early Christian fathers interested in establishing a calendar date. So in early Christian history, they weren't even worried about whether finding out, oh, was Jesus born on this day? Was Christ born on this day? Was it this day or that day? They didn't concern themselves with such things because it seemed so low. Not low, but like so, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't think trivial is the right word, but it is insignificant, right? It just seems so insignificant to worry about when he was born. And then now, mind you, there's no mention of a specific date of when Christ was born. Right? Let's keep reading. Let's see. Next paragraph. The nativity is not mentioned among the certain days, like of Pentecost, day of preparation, Passover, and Pentecost, that should be observed. Nor is it included in the feast recognized by Tertullian, right? So I guess this is another early Christian writer, right? Let's see what that comes up when I do this. Oh, nothing. But this is an early Christian writer, right? And it was from his excerpt on baptism, right? Who, writing in the last year of the 2nd century AD, admonished Christians not to partake in the Saturnalia. So this is where Saturnalia is being mentioned, right? And this is where the debate of Christmas and Saturnalia starting, which the whole concept of Christmas and Saturnalia, that argument that them being the same, that actually starts around through the 4th or 5th century, right? Couple like 100 years after when this was written, maybe 100. But this Christian writer, right? This is 200 years, right? Look, it says the 2nd century AD. So this is 200 years, right? After Christ. We see Christian writers still not recognizing days like birthdays or celebration of the birth of Christ. And then this Christian writer warns Christians to not partake in Saturnalia, right? Or gift giving at the new year or midwinter or an idol's birthday when every pump of the devil is frequented. And that's an excerpt on that he gave on idolatry. So you see early Christian writers such as this man here, right? Urge Christians don't celebrate Saturnalia, don't give gifts at the new year, right, in January or midwinter, because that's when the Roman New Year is, right? Or an idol's birthday, right? Why? Because we see birthdays were a Roman tradition rooted in paganism and in their religious practices. The Saturnalia and New Year's and midwife festivals and matronalia are frequented. Presents come and go. New Year gifts, games join their nose, banquets join their dim. Just as the heaven does not celebrate the Lord's Day or Pentecost, so Christians should not partake in their festivals, right? Should not partake in their festivals. Rather, they have a festive day every week, whereas pagans celebrate only once a year, right? And I'm assuming that this festive day every week he's referring to is the Shabbat, right? Um, or what they would call, and what Christians would call in that time, the Lord's Day, right? So look what this says right here. If the birth of Christ was not celebrated by the early church, it was because there was no consensus as to when it actually had occurred. Writing shortly after the assassination of Commodus on December 31st, 192 AD, Clement of Alexandria provides the earliest documented dates for the Nativity: 194 years, 1 month, and 13 days. He says had eclipsed since then, which corresponds to the date of November 18th. Or if the 49 intercalary days missing for the Alexandrian calendar are added, January 6th. Moreover, there are those who have determined not only the year of our Lord's birth, but also the day, including dates in April, May, as well as another day in January. So the topic or debate of when he could have been born wasn't really even being thrown around. So almost 200 years after Christ died, right? Not necessarily the celebration, but just the idea of when he was born, right? So it's well documented that early Christians did not celebrate Christmas or Christmas, as they call it, because they deemed it was rooted in paganism to celebrate the birth of anybody. And it was not in the culture of the Israelites or the Jews, as they say, to celebrate the birth. And then early Christians, when they're forming their theology, so to speak, based off the Israelite customs, traditions, and culture, right? They even affirm to not celebrate it because it was deemed to be pagan. It's too many. It's too much stuff, too much dark clouds around this tradition for it to be anything other than wicked, right? So we see it's nowhere mentioned in the scriptures, right? Nowhere alluded to. And the practice of creating such a tradition actually go against the law and the prophets. And we're going to get into that later on. But we see here that regardless if Christmas in itself has nothing to do with Saturnalia or has nothing to do with Sol Invictus, let's just say it has nothing to do with with those specific Roman holidays, right? It's still celebrating the birth of somebody, which goes against the laws in the testimony, which is off, right? Hippolytus, right? This is another um, Christian writer in I think the 3rd century. A younger contemporary of Clement does state that the nativity had occurred on December 25th. And although the statement may be a later interpolation, he reiterated several decades later that Jesus was born 9 months after the anniversary of the creation of the world. See, this is where this concept of Christ had to be born 9 months when he died, and when he died is the same date as the creation of the world, which Hippolytus believed to be on March 25th. The nativity thus would be on December 25th. Again, this whole school of thought right here from this Christian writer in the 3rd century has no cement or no solid foundation that can be drawn from at all whatsoever. Right? In about 221 AD, Julius Africanus wrote I'm not going to read this as Latin, the first Christian chronology. Although he does not specifically mention nativity, he believed that Jesus had been conceived on March 25th. So another writer from Julius Africanus is saying, "Oh, Christ must have been conceived on March 25th." Cyprian is the first Christian writer to associate the birth of Jesus with the sun, the splendid and divine providence of the Lord on that day, even at that very day on which the sun was made, March 28th. Christ should be born. So now these are just other. It's just madness that these Christian writers in the 3rd and 4th century are just spewing. They're just saying stuff, drawing from no solid foundation. They're just making stuff up, essentially, right? But then this is where the concept or the debate of Christ and the sun god from the Romans starts coming into play. Let's see, there was another. Actually, I'm not going to get this whole thing. There was another one I wanted to get. Let's see. See, now we have here the nativity was first celebrated in Alexandria on December 25th, 432 AD. So now another reference that Christmas was first celebrated not 336 AD, but 100 years, even another 100 years later. Right? The times between the Nativity and the Epiphany became known as the 12 days of Christmas. Right? John Cassian from 435 AD writes that the church in Egypt continued to celebrate both the baptism and nativity, not separately as in Western provinces, but on a single festive day. So now there's festivals on celebrating Christ's baptism and the day he was born, his nativity, right? But essentially, it just starts evolving over time. As you see, the dates start getting later, 435 AD, 336 AD, so on and so forth, right? But we see that they're drawing their understanding of when to celebrate Christmas on smoke and vapor, right? It's madness. It makes no sense. But we see that early Christians refuse to celebrate it. The Jews, our ancestors, our people, we refuse to celebrate it. And early Christians drawing from that sentiment. But then we see over time, the conversation starts about when he was born. Then more times passes. Then conversations start on, should we celebrate the day of his baptism? Should we celebrate his nativity, as the word they like to use, the day he was born? Then the conversations of should we celebrate that starts coming into play. Over time, it just keeps growing and growing and growing into its own thing. To where now we have a fat red guy in a suit going around the whole world on a damn wooden sleigh with 12 pieces of venison, right, deer, right, flying around the sky, dropping presents to every single person in the whole world. And like, that's madness. Then you see evergreens and Christmas trees. A lot of these Christmas traditions stemming from Germany in the last 200 years, right? Some references go back to the Middle Ages, but regardless, I'm not gonna try to disprove Christmas on a point like me and you was talking, bro, about earlier about like Jeremiah 10:1, where a lot of Hebrew Israelites will go to that to say, see, Christmas was celebrated years before Christ was born. I'm not even gonna worry about going down that road
Right.
because it's not a solid foundation. And though it Jeremiah 10, though it's not specifically like very specifically talking about a Christmas tree, the customs are very similar to a Christmas tree, and we do need to take that into account, right? To avoid that, right? Because they'll decorate their idols the same way people decorate Christmas trees, right? Regardless if it was a carved image or a full tree, right? We need to avoid that altogether. But to say that it's specifically talking about Christmas practices, I'm not going to go down that road, right? But what I will go down is the fact that it's the celebrate of a birth, right? And that we didn't celebrate these things. That's the issue that were taking place, and that I can bake on with 100% certainty and with historical documentation, right? Regardless if Christmas was celebrated during the time of Jeremiah, right, by Babylonians or not, regardless if it was Roman Saturnalia or Roman Sol Invicti, right, Viticus or however they pronounce it, regardless of any of that, right? There's no solid to like the 100th degree proof that Christmas comes from those things, right? So I'm not even gonna worry about going down that rabbit hole. I'm gonna just bake on word. Okay, okay. All praises, all praises. Come on, come on. That's what we're here for. We're here to teach and educate, right? But I'm not even gonna worry about going down those rabbit holes, right? And a lot of the times, though those schools of thought have little traction, they do have some traction, and it goes back to different points in history. Nowadays, people just spew it rhetorically, right? As just rhetoric. And then when they get to somebody who studied, it starts getting shaky, right? And it's not a solid foundation to begin with going down that route. There is a bit of a foundation, but it's not solid. So the solid foundation that I'm gonna bake on is the fact that historians from the universe the article put out by the University of Chicago cites these records written by these people in the first century, written by the Romans in the first, second, third century, written by Christian authors, second and third and fourth centuries, proving from the mouth of these people during those times, saying we are not going to celebrate the day of birth of anybody. And that the Romans were doing that. They were celebrating the birth of Julius Caesar uh, throughout their traditions. They're celebrating key other emperors like Augustus, and they're celebrating the birthdays of their friends and families and all that stuff um, throughout their Roman cultural customs. And we see early Christians in the first century wanted nothing to do with that. Let me see. I think my connection just cut out real quick. Oh, there we go. You good up?
Yes, Lockie.
That's all good. It's all good. Um, so the route that I'm a bank on, right, is that it's still rooted in paganism. It's still rooted in wickedness, but not necessarily in the way that we hear, right? And so now what I'm gonna do is I read that document, different excerpts throughout that document. Because it's a lot, right? It's detailed as all hell. Um, and maybe when I upload this video, I'll post a link to this to where we can find this paper that was produced by the University of Chicago. All right, bet I'm gonna do that real quick, bro. I'm gonna send that link. Slacky, excuse me. So just give me one moment. All right, bet. I just sent that. All praises to the Most High. But yeah, when I upload this video, I'm gonna upload the link to this article because it's a lot of stuff in here, very, very, very detailed. But the main points, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that really isn't necessary, right? And it can get very drowning. But the main points that to harp on, right? Let me just add it back real quick before I move on from it. Because a lot of people, especially when it comes to the topic of Christmas, since there's nowhere to be found in the Bible, the only thing we can use to go off of is the historical documents relating to it and around it or about it, right? Since there's no biblical or scriptural data on it whatsoever, right? So then we see, right? And then a lot of people say, well, we want sources from that time period. Well, the sources from that time period says, right here, says, unlike the Romans, both Jews and Christians did not recognize birthdays at all, right? And the fact that they're mentioning birthdays in a paper that's supposed to be about connecting the connection between Christmas and our ancient Roman festival is a point to take note of, right? And then first century Jewish historian Josephus writes, the law does not permit us to make festivals at the dates of births of our children and thereby afford occasions to drink to excess, right? That's what a Jewish historian records, right? And then we also see on the specific birth of Christ that nowhere in the Bible doesn't mention it, and that their reasoning of finding this out is done on a method of thinking that doesn't have any foundation, right? So now we see that it was something that early Christians did not do. They did not celebrate Christmas or birthdays because they were essentially considered the same thing. Celebrating the birth of Christ is still a birthday celebration, regardless of how you put it, right? Regardless of who it's for. And that's why the point I was making earlier in this class earlier is if I see a festival the East Indians do, right, but I want to do it for Christ, does that make it good? Of course, it doesn't make it good. I can't just see something that these other people do in their relation to their gods and try to put it to my culture. It makes no sense. And then putting the Most High's name on it or the name of the Most High's Son on that is wild. And we're gonna see how the scripture feels about doing such things, right? So now I'm gonna go into the book of Job, chapter 1, and I believe, where is it at? Okay, boom. If you can read Job 1, 4 through verse 5 for me, Baba Kusha.
Shalaki, I had to unmute. All right. The book of Job, chapter 1, verse 4. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their three sisters to eat and drink with them. Verse 5. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. Verse 6. One day the angels came to present. Oh, we good. All right.
Yeah, you good. The point was in verses 4 and 5, right? And this is the NIV translation, right? In the KJV, it just says held feasts on their days, which even in the Hebrew, their days is a specific day in the year, right? So essentially, Job's kids were celebrating their birthdays. And so what Job would do is he would literally make atonements for them, for his kids following after a practice that is going against the Most High God, going against what we are supposed to be doing. So we see this is the one of the only direct passages that talk about celebrating birthdays, right? Something that people were actually doing, and Job making atonements for his children on their behalf for them doing such I don't want to say heinous, but doing such acts that go against what's pleasing to the Most High God, right? So that's already strike one on just celebrating birthdays in general, and then trying to put Christ into that tradition, right? And celebrating his birth, which is something that was never mentioned in the scriptures by him or anybody, right? Um, and then the next we're gonna get no, we already got it. Isaiah 8 and 20 earlier. Or my next is Ecclesiastes 7. All right. You can just read verse 1 for me real quick.
Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth.
Right. So we see here in Ecclesiastes, right, the day of death really should be, if there's any day to make a remembrance of, it'd be the day of a death rather than the day of someone being born, right? And this was also cited in the document by the University of Chicago that we was reading earlier, right? This was one of the scriptures that was mentioned. So we see this is a second instance of after Job making atonement for his kids because they were celebrating their birthdays. And then we see here in Ecclesiastes, right, that the day of birth of one being born isn't something to be glorified or honored or commemorated or remembered, you know what I mean, as a feast or a ceremony, right? And then we're going to get Jeremiah chapter 20. Where was it? Okay, yeah. Start at verse 1 and then I mean not verse 1, verse 13. I mean 14 and 15. Yeah, come on. Salakia. I was all over the place.
All right, the book of Jeremiah, chapter 20, verse 13. You said 14. Cursed be the day wherein I was born. Let not the day wherein my mother bare me be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought tidings to my father, saying, a man child is born unto thee, making him very glad.
Right. So this is the second instance in which Jeremiah is even saying that, and when you read it, contextually, he's going on just lamenting about the day he was born, right? And saying it's something that shouldn't be glorified, right? The day of birth is not something to be put on a pedestal, so to speak, and to be commemorated. Again, right? We see Job was committing atonements for his kids to bring his birthday. In Ecclesiastes, it's the day of birth is being put down like it's not something to be honored. And then we see in Jeremiah saying, "Curse the day he was born," right? So we see a running theme throughout the testimonies, right? Like we read it earlier in Isaiah 8 and 20. To the law and to the testimony, if it speaks not according to these words, because there's no light in them. We see in the testimonies of Job and Ecclesiastes and in Jeremiah that the celebration of the day of one's birth is not something to be honored or glorified, right? And so we see the running theme throughout the scriptures that so far people throughout the scriptures are against such a thing, right? And we see a lot of, when you look historically, a lot of these practices like the blowing of the candles, giving wishes, right, celebrating the day in general, go back to certain things like what the Romans were doing, right? And like we read earlier in that document, right, where it makes mention in the passages of the New Testament where John the Baptist was killed because he denounced um one of her let me just get it real quick so I'm not ill paraphrasing it, right? To where literally on a birthday celebration, a girl was asked to make a wish of what she wanted, and she wanted John the Baptist's head, and that was her birthday wish, right? Here we go. I'll just get it real quick since I'm bringing it up. Might have passed it. Yeah, no, I passed it. Here we go. Right. So it says, unlike the Romans, Jews and Christians tended not to recognize birthdays. Right. We already read that. Boom. Here we go. Only two birthdays are mentioned in the New Testament: that of Pharaoh, Genesis 40 and 20, and Herod Antipas, right, of Galilee, whose marriage to his brother's wife Herodias had been denounced by John. When her daughter Salome danced before the king at his birthday feast, she was promised whatever she might ask, which at that instigation of her mother was the head of John the Baptist, right? So we see a form of a birthday wish, if you will, right? During a birthday celebration. Another reason why to abstain from such things. Those are the practices of the Romans and not the practices of our people. And we're going to see how the Most High feels about taking on practices that don't originate from our people and taking on practices that are rooted in the worship of these other deities or other creations, right? Or other people, right? Read verses 1 through 4. Bible Kushah.
Khan. This is Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 1. These are the statutes and judgments which ye shall observe to do in the land, which the Lord God of thy fathers giveth thee to possess it all the days that ye live upon the earth. Ye shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which ye shall possess serve which ye shall possess serve their gods upon the high mountains and upon the hills and upon every green tree. And ye shall overthrow their altars and break their pillars and burn their groves with fire. And ye shall hew down the graven images of their gods and destroy the names of them out of that place. Ye shall not do so unto the Lord your God, but unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come.
Uh, so we see essentially, right, the Most High is giving instructions to the children of Israel what to do when they're first and entering their land. Right, destroy all these wicked nations, destroy their groves, destroy their altars, destroy their gods, blot out their names. And it specifically says in verse 4, ye should not do so unto the Lord your God. Now, mind you, we do, our ancestors did sacrifice to the Most High God. There were altars built, there were temples built. Sacrificing in of itself is not bad, but then these people is giving the instructions to not do it in the manner and mechanism as these other nations did to their gods. However, they sacrificed to their gods, not to do it, right? The way they did it, don't do it, right? There's nothing wrong with having a feast, but why are you having the feast? Are you having a feast to celebrate the day of your birth? We know that the Romans were doing that, and we can't take something that the other nations do and try to mix it to our customs. As we see, the Most High is strictly against it. And then we're going to see even more explicit explanation of it later on at the end of this chapter. Read verse 30 to the end.
Uh, this is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter what's the chapter again? Excuse me.
Salakia, chapter 12.
Excuse me. Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 30. Take heed to thyself that thou be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. Thou shalt not do so unto the Lord thy God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hateth have thee done unto their gods, for even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it.
Right. So essentially, we see right here later on at the end of this passage, they're saying, don't be curious or like enticed, right? How these other nations followed their gods and how they went about it. And it says specifically, don't look at these things and say, hey, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it in the name of my God, right? The scriptures clearly said the Most High God says, even if you're doing it for the Most High God, even if you're doing it for Christ, don't. Because if these traditions, customs, and practices and rituals, however you want to word it, if they stem from another nation and their custom and traditions and culture and their relation to their God, we are to leave it alone. We're not to add it and mix it however we want. We are to see it and leave it where it is. Right? It's explicitly expressed at the beginning of this chapter, and it's explicitly expressed at the end of the chapter, even more so in verses 30 and 31. Right? Literally, it says, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so, what I do likewise. But then it says, thou shalt not do so unto the Lord thy God. So don't inquire, okay, how did these Romans celebrate their loved ones and their gods and their deities? Oh, they celebrated the birthday of their gods. They celebrated the birthday of their families. Well, I'm going to celebrate the birthday of our most important figure, Christ, right? That's the understanding of, the establishment of Christmas being laid out in the 3rd and 4th century. But we see that that's not something that we can do. We see the testimony from Job. We see the testimony from Ecclesiastes, right? We see the testimony from Jeremiah. And then we also saw the testimonies from the 1st century Christians who didn't celebrate it for the same reasons. It's too explicit for us to do anything other than just leave it where it is and just not partake in it, right? I think I got one more. I think in Deuteronomy 12 again, but in another translation. Okay, yeah, boom. All right, let me share my screen. So we're gonna get Deuteronomy 12:30 to the bottom again, but in another translation, and it gets even more explicit, right? We're gonna get it in the NLT. So if you can just read 30
All right.
to Babakasha.
This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verse 30. Do not fall into the trap of following their customs and worshiping their gods. Do not inquire about their gods, saying, how do these nations worship their gods? I want to follow their example. You must not worship the Lord your God the way the other nations worship their gods, for they perform for their gods every detestable act that the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters as sacrifices to their gods. So be careful to obey all the commands I give you. You must not add anything to them or subtract anything from them. You on mute.
Salakia. Salakia, right? And take note to the wording in the first line of 31. You must not worship the Lord your God the way the other nations worship their gods, right? And then it gives an example of what they were doing, but it's not just, oh, this is the only example to not do. No, anything that these other nations do in reference to their pantheons, to their deities, to their mythologies and religions, whatever they do, we are to not do it or incorporate it in any way, shape, or form to our culture at all, right? Is that finite, right? So then we see Christians saying, oh, we can celebrate Christmas because it's a harmless tradition. And there's nothing wrong with traditions, they'll say, right? But like we read earlier in Mark, right? We can't lay aside the commandment of God for traditions. The traditions in them of themselves are not innately bad. They're inanimate, so to speak. But it's what the tradition is, why you do it, that makes it bad. Case in point, Purim and Hanukkah are traditions. They're not laws. They're not high holy days, but they're traditions and feast days that are commemorated memorially, right, throughout generations at the time of when they were established. They're not law. They're not commanded by the Most High God, but we see Christ Himself celebrating certain things like Purim and the Feast of Dedication, or known as Hanukkah, another name for it. Christ celebrating those things.
Yeah, this is such a great cut right here because a lot of especially our people like to like be like, when you try to tell them the truth about what Thanksgiving is or the truth about what Christmas is, they like to undermine it by, oh well, I know why I'm doing it. Or I do it to get with the family, or I know what I'm doing. But this right here is clearly saying you can't say you're doing it for God, but you're doing what I'm saying, the same thing that, like you said, the other nations are doing.
God, bro, exactly, exactly. That's no, that's bro. Literally, all my family and almost the majority of people I've talked to not celebrate these things. Or I do it for the family, I do it for the kids, or I do it for Christ now, or I do it for this, or I do it for that. Is is wild to say because one, not only do we see here, right? It specifically says even if you want to do it for God, you can't, right? But then what blows me, right? I remember I had a conversation with my father one time about Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Fourth of July, or in Easter, right? I said, I looked at my look, those are 4 days. Because you'll say it's an excuse to get to the family together to talk about God and whatnot and be together as good Christians, right? I'm like, that's 4 days out of year, right? Regardless of the fact that we can't do it because most like God said not to, as we see here,
Right.
but that's 4 days. I told him, I'm like, yo, pops, Shabbat is every week. That's 52 times a year. Just on the Shabbats alone, that's 52 times. That already dwarfs the 4 days a year you say you use an excuse to get together as a family. You got Shabbats.
Yeah, and those Shabbats you could be trying to bring them together for God.
Exactly. Shabbats. New moons. That's another 12 times a year. You know what I mean? So that's 52 plus 12, right? And then you got Passover. And then you got Feast of First Fruits. And then Feast of Ingathering or Harvest, right? And then you got Tabernacles, right? And then some of these festivals are literally weeks long. Like Tabernacles is a whole week. You know what I mean? Like they are literally over damn near 100 days. You know what I mean? That we could use biblically as an excuse to get together and talk about the Most High or Christ and the scriptures. You know what I mean? It's a lot more than just Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter and Fourth of July. Days that ironically stem from paganism.
Hmm. Now, Salakia, I got one question from one of our listeners. Right? They want to know,
Yes.
like, what would be lawful to celebrate on birthdays? What would be lawful to do? Um, uh, you know, being that we're trying to follow the right way.
Well, I would say as far as birthdays go, to I, I wouldn't focus on a birthday, right? But celebrations, like how people go about celebrating birthdays, they'll get together, have a feast. There might be a cake, or they'll give gifts and give presents, right? Very similar to what we were reading, what the Romans were doing, right? On those days, right? But let's just take the concept of a nice feast and eat maybe a nice cake, right? And gift giving, right? Days like there's tradition like Purim. Purim is a day where feasting was done and even gifts were exchanged, right? Hanukkah, right? The feast of dedication, right? Um, it was a time is a time to feast, get together as a family, exchange gifts for one another, right? Um, and be happy and be merry in that regard, right? And so there's multiple times throughout the year where you can, you know, I don't want to say do what people do on birthdays, right? But like, because like I said, it's not necessarily the tradition itself is bad; it's
You're
the
basically
why.
saying that you're
Uh-huh.
basically saying like there's other times of the year where you're not gonna miss out on what you think you're missing out on.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. You know what I mean? Because I know birthdays. Of course, when I was a child celebrating, birthdays with my family, I was looking forward to my birthday. Oh, I get gifts, I get presents, and then come Christmas time, I'm getting excited for Christmas for the exact same reason. And as a kid, that's all you know. You know what I mean? You just get excited because you know you're eating good food. You know, cake is sweet and delicious. You're getting some new video games, or you're getting some new Jordans or whatnot, and you get excited, you get happy, right? You look forward to that, right? Um, speaking at least from the perspective of like a child or someone who's young, right? And then even when you get older, like someone like myself, I take pleasure in doing nice things for people, or not necessarily getting gifts, but like spending money on people. You know what I mean? Um, like that's a form of love language for some people, is like gift giving, right? So yes, there are numerous other times throughout the year where you can um you can do that, and you can still you know do things in that manner, so to speak. Like I remember one year I had for feast of dedication, I bought my lady a new console, right? I think it was like a Switch or something she was asking for. So she wanted a Switch, so I'm like, okay, I bet I got you. Right, it was right around the same time of year that Hanukkah was coming up. So I was like, all right, she wanted a Switch. Boom, bought her the Switch. We had all of us got together at one of the brothers' houses. Right, we had food. You know, we were sitting down, and then boom, I got it out, gave her her gift, and she loved it. You know what I mean? So that same sentiment can be kept in ways that we see documented historically, biblically, and scripturally, to where we can still get that feel, so to speak, right? Of giving gifts and being glad and being joyful and merry and eating without necessarily doing it in ways that are bad, if that makes sense. Like,
Con. So basically, to clarify for the young brother, like, don't try to make the day so much about your birth. Don't expect a party. Don't try to set these things up how you used to do it, right?
right. Instead, look forward to a feast day that we can see found in scriptures, like Passover, right? You can look forward to that day and look forward to making that day special, right? And honorable and joyful, and then give gifts to somebody you love, right? Or, if you set it up with your friends and family in a way where everyone's exchanging gifts to each other, you can be, happy. Okay, I might get some gifts. I might give gifts, and I might get gifts. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with feasting and gift giving, right? Nothing wrong with that, but it's the how, the when, and the why. That's where the parallels, or that's where the line is drawn, right? So on the day of your birth, what I would say is go about it the same way like that. Most of us in the truth go about it. When we start going into the scriptures, is it's just another day. You know what I mean? It's another day. Of course, you can be grateful, and joyful. Be grateful and joyful every day. You know what I mean? Or try to be, right? But you go, okay, I'm another year older, right? But it's something casual, right? Um, and just look forward to the next feast day, to where you can make it up special, right? Decorate the crib. Um, if you and your family want to have a certain tradition where y'all do something specific on those days, ain't nothing wrong with that, right? Um, if usually there's like a special cake that your mama, or tia or abuela likes to make on certain days, you know what I mean, make them on those days, you know what I mean, and make it something to look forward to. There's nothing wrong with creating your own little traditions in that regard, as long as we see them not going against the
But
laws and the testimony, as we see like
and no candle lighting, no cakes. You know what I mean?
right. Right, don't put a candle on the cake, make a wish, and blow the candles. Nah, if you want to light a candle, I would suggest get a menorah, right? But we're not making wishes on, on the menorah, but get a menorah, get some candlesticks in them, and light them. You know what I mean?
Where we did that last year.
You see, you know what I mean? And ultimately, we have these days throughout the year, right? Like Passover, Feast of Dedication, Feast of Purim, Memorial Simon and Nicanor, um, the Feast of Trumpets, things of that sort, right? We see them throughout the year, right? And the only thing that we're commanded to do is get together feast with our friends and family. Let me just take this off, right? Get together, feast with our friends and family, praise the Most High, right? And have a good time, right? So within that, we can do it up however we feel, as long as we're not adding customs that stem from another culture's religion, so to speak, right? But that's how I would that's how I would go about it, if that makes sense.
Con.
Word, I think that's all the tabs that I had. Let me just make sure if I missed any tabs. Okay, okay. Here's something. There was another Christian website that I went to when they were talking that when they're talking about um birthday celebrations, and I just thought it was odd that they would say this, right? So look at this paragraph here, right? It says opponents of birthday celebrations point out that many ceremonies like birthdays and symbols were used in these ceremonies, such as candles, were first used by non Christians and pagan ceremonies. However, just because something originated in such a culture does not automatically make it wrong. That's against the scriptures. The pagans even had harvest festivals dedicated to their pagan gods before God gave Israel the round of annual festivals. Again, sacrificing animals on an altar isn't innately wrong, as we saw in Deuteronomy 12, but how we do about it, right? And the rituals we go about it is what makes it wrong, right? Look what they say here. Just because the pagans did it first does not mean that it is therefore forbidden, which I find that wild for a Christian to say, basically defending pagan practices because they want to do it for Christ, right? Is wild. And we see that specifically goes against what we just read in Deuteronomy 12:30 and 31, and even in the NLT. We can't do anything for God or Christ if it stems from something that is originally pagan. You know what I mean? Or originally in reference to another culture's religion, in other words, right? But they'll try to justify it in many different ways. And what it really is, it's a play on emotions, right? And that's really where the stronghold is. Oh, it's we want to make the kids happy. Oh, look how happy they are. They're smiling, they're joyful, they're enjoying their childhood, they're living life. It's so pure, it's so beautiful, right? But what's crazy to me is why can't people captivate or take hold of those same beautiful emotions, but in a more righteous way? If you want to make your children happy, why not make these fun celebrations surrounded by days we see in the scriptures, right? And make them great and fun. I just saw a video the other day at the Sakari School in Atlanta. Um, they had a whole group of kids, right? And one of the main brothers, brother Nakamaya, right? Beautiful brother, man. Um, he was playing games with the kids, and the kids are jumping and having a good time, having fun. And then they had a whole bunch of gifts that they were giving to the kids. You know what I mean? And the kids were loving it, right? Small like elementary age kids. You know what I mean? That he was um, playing these games with, but the kids were having a great time. They were eating great food. They were getting different toys and games and puzzles and gifts and things of that sort, right? And it was a lovely festival. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think those kids were having just a great amount of time as if they would if they when they were celebrating, like if it was those same emotions that they would get, like how kids get on a birthday celebration. So the whole concept of doing it for the kids to make them happy, we can do the same thing, and we can do the same thing multiple times a year, which is even better. They got birthdays and Christmas 2 times a year, right? Which those two things are already wicked as it is. But then we can captivate those same feelings and emotions, the joy, the gladness, the happiness, several times a year. And in my opinion, that's a even more richer childhood. They say they want their kids to have a lovely, rich childhood. How about these celebrations several times throughout the year that your child can look forward to and get gifts if that's part of how y'all want to go about it, right? And give them an even more enriched childhood experience. Am I making sense? Y'all following?
No, that makes perfect sense. And like you said, the fact that we don't know these things, the fact that the average Israelite does not know these things is what, like you said, it is not glorified. So it would actually be a great thing too to, we might have a class where we go through these different feasts and showing, what I'm saying, how we can find joy in these things. You know what I mean?
Of course, definitely. You know what? Um, let's make that next week's lesson surrounded by that, and we'll go into the different documents throughout the scriptures of how our ancestors celebrated Passover. Right? There's a passage where Solomon he celebrated Passover for damn near 2 weeks straight. Right? Longer than what it's supposed to be held for, but he he had a longer celebration for it. You know what
He
I mean?
enjoyed himself that much.
Bro, he enjoyed himself that much. You know what I mean? And so we'll definitely get into it for real,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah, I think
you
that's major, man. That we started, saying, laying the path and showing these young men. You know what I mean?
con for real. And I
Like the
think
like the like that one scripture saying, it said, tearing down the altars and the pillars. You know what I mean? Tearing down these pagan holidays and showing them the right way, man.
con show me. And that's the way I look at it, is that we're tearing down these pagan, tearing down these pillars that hold our people to these pagan festivals, but we're also replacing them with righteous ones. But we're not just replacing them with righteous ones, we're giving them even more. Like, that's the
Right.
thing that, like, is so drawn to me. Like, there's more festivals than what we're used to celebrating, in this, Christianized mindset, so to speak, or this Americanized or Western mindset.
Right. And we like to party, so if there's more parties, man, you know what I'm saying?
Listen, we're gonna get into it next week, where we're gonna get into the scriptures about how our ancestors partied and celebrated these feast days and these festivals. Because, man, listen, if you seen, right, because I know you Puerto Rican, right? I'm Costa Rican. You know what I mean? In the so called Latin or Hispanic communities, we can see how our peoples get down, right? We see how we get down
Oh,
at the
for sure.
barbecues, the potlucks, or or how the Mexicans do on what they call the, like, carne asada, barbecue.
Yo, I was just
Bro,
gonna mention when Shalakia, when Cat Williams said Mexicans party don't end in that first special he did.
I'm saying, bro, it's true, bro. And I've never seen that before until it was I gotta say, I think it was when my great abuela had passed. All the whole family got together, right, for her ceremony, but then later that night we partied, right? And celebration of my great abuela, to remember her, right? Um and it was to the point where it died down. Some of our cousins went home, some stayed the night, but then the very next morning they all came back and we kicked it back up again, and we just kept it going. Like, it literally did not start. It's like I basically took a nap, woke up. Okay, there's Tony on the couch still. You know what I mean? And then Greg and all them are coming back the next morning, and and then we doing it up again. You know what I mean? And we see similar things like what Solomon was doing, partying for several days. You know what I mean? So we see there's a lot of similarities in even how our people do certain things nowadays. It's very similar to how our ancestors doing it in the ancient times. And this is one thing that I really stress, especially when new people coming into this truth. Because a lot of people, they look at us like we're boring Jehovah's Witness type deals. Oh, we're just, we're a stick in the sand, or however the saying is. We're boring. We don't celebrate no holidays. We don't do nothing. All we do is just read the Bible for 4 or 5 hours, like they do in, like, a lot of those Spanish Pentecostal churches, and it's boring, and it's like, nah, man. We read the scriptures, we take it seriously, but we also know how to be loose. You know what I mean? We also know to not be so uptight. You know what I mean? We also know
Right. We can't be the salt of the earth and not show a little, what I'm saying, little kickback.
I'm saying, man, ain't nothing wrong with it, right? We do see the scriptures giving advice on how to conduct ourselves to where we don't get carried away, right? But other than that, ain't nothing wrong with it, right? At all. And we're gonna do that. We're gonna do that. That's gonna be so next week we're gonna get into, the different feasts that Passover, Purim, Hanukkah, Nicanor, all these feast days, right? And then we're gonna get into, you know, the different passages and how, we went about celebrating them and the significance of them and that sort. I think that'll definitely be needed.
Yeah, yeah. I think that'll be amazing. Very edifying.
All praises to the Most High. But Khan, this week was, I don't want to say short and sweet, but more precise and concise, so to speak, right? So obviously the recap we went over basically Christ talking to the Pharisees. We can't lay aside the commandments of God for the traditions of men. So, and then we see Isaiah 8 and 20, to the law and to the testimony. If it speaks not according to these words, there's no light. So the commandments and the testimony, traditions have to not break these things. That is the lens. If it doesn't break these things, do what you want to do. Do what you want to do. But we see Christmas goes against those traditions because it's celebrating the birthday, regardless of who it's for. It's celebrating the birthday of Christ, which we see the Romans were heavy into that. And we see in Deuteronomy 12, the Most High told us to not celebrate or do or worship in any way, facet, or mechanism, even if it's for God or Christ, if it originates from these other nations. And so we got to stay away from Christmas with those measuring sticks that we've seen. So, you got anything else that you want to add or point out before we close out? Art?
No, you hear everything right on point, bro.
All praises to the Most High. Khan. So with that, I'm gonna give all honor, all praise, all glory due to the Most High God, Yahawah, Bahashem, Hamashiach, Yahweh Shai, and say Shalom.
Shalom.